Hello and welcome to this session. You may be aware that we've had to put a temporary fire safety plan in place because of the fire alarm system is not working at the moment. We're hoping that middle of next week we should have a new fire alarm installed, but I thought it's worth going through a few changes, should we say, temporary measures that we have to have in place. One, because our insurance have asked us to do this. Secondly, I'm also revising the fire risk assessment as a temporary measure to show the changes. So with that in mind, that's the purpose of this session. So you've not just been issued with the temporary fire safety plan and that you can read through it, but also you've had a bit of instruction to support the extra bits and pieces. So what I'm going to go through is the plan, the extra things we have to do to manage fire risks, a, a term called if safe to do so, which I think is very important to explain if we're asking you to do things in a real fire or live fire situation. The safety checks that we want you to go through, the increased amount of patrolling that we'll have to do every 30 minutes, the evacuation procedure that's going to be slightly different because of this temporary situation. And then if it is a small fire and if you feel comfortable and if it is safe to do so, then use of fire extinguishers on the small fires. Okay, so I mentioned briefly that fire risk assessment is already in place, but as you can probably see there on the right hand side, we've put this temporary fire safety plan, 2 pages, just a short document to explain the variations. So hopefully within a week or so, you'll see a brand new fire panel that will replace that. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to revise the fire risk assessment. So I videoed this when I was stood outside. So our key means of detection, but also raising an alarm, is going to be out of use. So let's say upstairs in the studio, there's now no smoke detector or heat detector that's going to activate if there was a small fire starting to grow. We rely heavily on the building design, and that's why I put a picture in there of the door shut to the studio at the top of the stairs. But that's what we're trying to imply there. The building does a lot. We're not worried about the fire in terms of the damage it can cause to the building itself. The most important thing to do is get everybody out safely as possible and as quickly as possible. So the temporary fire safety plan, whilst the fire alarm is inactive, sorry. Oops. So what we're saying there is we can't rely on typically the alarm going off and then a sounder being seen, or in some cases beacons that are flashing, to be able to take the appropriate action. So first of all, the extra safeguards and controls are put in place. Number one, there's no need to have any extra hazards such as hot work from contractors. So, using burners or having boilers on site that they might bring in with them, or compressed air systems that might increase risk as such. Definitely asking for more patrols, which is on the next slide. So every 30 minutes, doing that kind of, if you did have contractors on site, we call it fire watch. So what you're saying, when the work's completed, and the contractor might be moving off site, you still want to make sure that there's no embers or other means by which the fire might start up from being something unnoticed and quite small. So by increasing the amount of patrols or fire watch, we're hoping to see that if a small fire does start, or embers or smoke starts to put in place, then do something, identify it and get people out quickly before it becomes a big fire. Vigilance checks. So what we're saying there, it is low risk. I've done the fire risk assessment. The environment is low risk. The biggest cause in most places is electrical faults. Okay, so electricity is an ignition source. If you can put it side by side with fuels, whether they're flammables, whether they're just combustibles that are close to that starting point, should we say. That's when you can get a fire increasing. So there might be, for example, I'm not concerned about the plant room, but let's say there was an over storage of some flammable liquids in the plant room, and they were open, and then right at the side of it there's some kind of electrical fault that caused the ignition. That's where you can get increased risk of fires, but also it's in a quiet area. It's not got people in there all the time, so it could be 20 minutes, could be half an hour before that's seen. So hence the chance for something to start up. You could say the same about the beautician's area, which could be quiet and unoccupied at times when the gym is open, and similarly in the cupboards, or maybe that walkway between the gym and the studio, for example, which is not, should we say, occupied on a regular basis, but people might use it as a walk through from one to the other. So you see what I mean there in that respect. Things that aren't obviously seen on a regular basis could be potentially increased risk. On number 4, that I've said avoid unnecessary activities. The classic examples: barbecues, certain events where they're bringing flammable materials and combustible materials on site to do that work. Food preparation. I'm not bothered about the kitchen area, should we say, in terms of the microwave and also the toaster. I'm really not bothered about that, but other forms of large food preparation that might have been done. Hotter heating blowers of any fashion that might be used to finish off a job. I'm not saying about her, for example. I'm not saying about things that are used in the beautician's area, but keep vigilant, double check, and make sure you're happy that it remains safe and free of fire risks. And one of the biggest things in number 5 is good communication throughout. Because like I said before, we can't rely on that loud alarm going off and beacons and sounders in all the areas. So we're going to have to act quickly to make sure the club remains safe. So the increased fire patrols we're talking about, I mentioned 30 minutes, set a schedule in place, and then just tick it off to say, yeah, I've been round, checked all the areas, and then I'm happy that it's still low risk. If there are any significant changes, such as increases in fuel and other ignition sources that you've not noticed before, monitor that, but also communicate it, like it says at the bottom, particularly to Leonie as the duty manager, or anybody else that becomes the lead person when the duty manager is not on site. Checking all those areas that are not occupied, as I mentioned previously: cupboards, toilets, the exit routes on the first floor, the beauticians that might not be occupied all the time, etc., etc. So make sure you go into those remote and unoccupied areas and double check that. But report anything. If in doubt, check it out, let us know about it, and then at least we can do something to put it right if it needs it. So I mentioned before about this term, if so safe to do so. It's quantified in the middle point there. It is a statement that quantifies a decision-making process. Some people freak out in a fire situation, yeah, and they therefore themselves are not capable or able to be able to act rationally. There's no way around that, and therefore, if your evaluation of the situation is that it's not safe before you take any action, then the only action you can take is get out of the building. Okay, so we have to accept that. I would hope that you can react in a reasonable manner in a situation where it requires, because we've not got a fire alarm, that kind of slick and quick reaction that's needed. So means of escape, first of all, top thing to consider: people need to get out of any building to a place of relative safety, and in some cases going beyond that. So it may well be just to the fire muster point, or you might decide that the building is really burning hot now and it's affecting people, so you take them even further away for their safety as such. So all your exit routes need to be checked to make sure that they're clear, and then in a live fire situation that they can use them. Now, on the bottom point there, I've got use the evacuation checklist. I'm going to go through that in some detail, but there's an overriding statement at the top of the plan there that the duty manager, if Leonie, sorry, is on site, will be the lead person and take control of the evacuation. So that's our first approach, but it may be that the duty manager is not on site, therefore someone else will take control of the situation. But someone needs to take the lead, and that's the key point. So when we say if safe to do so, and it is qualifying the actions that we take, then if I was to say go back into a building that's potential a live fire and it could put you at risk, then there's no job that anybody does apart from fire officers where he'd ask you to put yourself in danger. Okay, so that's what we're saying. Think on your feet, and if you think the safest thing to do is to get out of the building, so be it. Okay. So the action to take in the event of a live fire for fire wardens and fire marshals, as known, is not just to evacuate the building, but to investigate potential causes. Now, what we're trying to do is get the balance here between false alarms and also somebody, jokingly shouting fire and then everybody reacting because the fire alarm's not there to confirm that a detector has picked it up. Okay, so the investigation part of it is to confirm that yes, there is a fire somewhere in the building. So I'll come back to that as part of the sweep or searching aspects of it later on, just to make sure that it's clear to everyone what we're asking you to, if it's safe to do so. So we proceed with caution, and obviously you're at some risk the further you go into a building. When you start to see evidence of smoke or fire, that's it. Stop, turn around, get out. Okay, you might be given an area that you're supposed to check and you've not got to that area. There's nothing you can do about that. Don't put yourself at risk. Turn around and get out. Okay, so risk assessment and dynamic risk assessment means look after number one and take the most appropriate action if safe to do so. Continue into the building, but what I don't want you to do is be overcome by smoke and then you're unconscious and the fire's spreading and that's the end of that kind of thing. So what we're saying is proceed with caution, don't put yourself at risk, and as soon as you know that there is evidence of smoke or fire, you'll see it, you'll smell it, then safety first, get out. If you've not got to that stage and part of the sweep or the checks that we're asking you to do is unknown until confirmed otherwise, then there's two aspects. You're going to assist with the evacuation, but also check those areas that you're in control of. Again, I'll describe those shortly so you know exactly what we mean by that. Assist with the evacuation, communicate with the lead person at the fire muster point once everybody's got out, wait for further instructions. There might be, can you go back inside and isolate the gas? But that's got to be done again in a safe manner. So everything we do is quantified by that if safe to do so. Now, we consider fire doors and fire exits as a big part of our means of escape. So I mentioned earlier about keep those routes clear, make sure the signage is doing its job so that if smoke starts to fill a particular area of the club, people can still get outside to a point of safety. It's right, doorways, and if you think at the bottom of the stairwell, the outside escape stairwell, we lock that at night, and you can do that when a building is not occupied. But we've always got into this procedure of opening up in the morning, and part of the routine of opening up is to unlock the bottom of the stairwell. Similarly, at the end of the night, to lock it off when we know the building is not occupied. So just double check to make sure that all means of escape, including the bottom of the stairwell and the fire doors, are openable and are not affected by too much resistance. Make sure you know your way out, and also all doors must remain unobstructed. In step 3 of the plan it says each person will assist evacuation in the designated area and instruct members to stop what they are doing, leave all belongings, and meet at the muster point outside. So what I want you to do in an assertive manner is to literally shout, fire! Yeah, it's a very effective way in gaining attention. Once you've got people's attention, you can then follow that with, please make your way to the nearest exit, leave your belongings, and meet at the muster point outside. And you just, in some cases, because I have met resistance in the past with evacuations, you just have to keep repeating and repeating until people say that they've got to get out of the building. Now, consider hours, you've got people who are exercising in the gym, they're going to be reluctant. You've also got people in the swimming pool, they're going to be reluctant to get out of there and go outside because they're worrying next to nothing. And also there's the aspect of being in the changing rooms as well, where they might be just getting out the showers, or they might be just getting changed. So you need to create a sense of urgency and move them out as professionally as you can in that respect, but without being overly aggressive. So that's why I use the term assertive, where you can keep repeating yourself and help speedily and timely get people out of the building. So that's part of your role in the evacuation of the club. Now, inside that plan, I've written down these routes for 3 people that we're asking you to do sweep, as I call it, but it could be search and clear. Yeah, it's another term that's used a lot as well. So what you're doing is you're sweeping an area that you've been allocated as part of your responsibility. I've split them into 4 parts. I want the lead person, it could be the duty manager. I want the lead person to remain near the reception area to assist with any communications. Reception areas are classed as low risk, and perhaps that's going to be the last point where everybody has to evacuate to go to the fire muster point. Okay, so that will be for 1 person, and then the other 3 will be designated the ground floor, including the men's section, the ground floor, the women's section, and then upstairs on the first floor as part of those checks. So that's what's written into the plan and what we want to be done. Yeah, now typically when I'm doing a fire evacuation procedure, this is what I look at in terms of, well, where are our fire alarms and where are the bigger risk areas? So part of our building plans helps me to be able to decide where people need to be evacuating from. So I'm looking at doors, I'm looking at means of escape, I'm looking at the routes to then say, okay, once they do get outside, where can they get, and roughly how long will it take? I'm hoping that people get outside of the building in less than 4 minutes. And on top of that, I'm asking you guys to do a sweep to see another 2 minutes to see if everybody can be completely evacuated out of the building after 6 minutes. So that's part of my theory, should I say, in trying to aim towards this. So in the plan, this is the 4 areas that I've designated with people of responsibility. I've not named titles. You'll see that area 2 has staff 1, area 3 has staff 2, and area 4 has staff 3. Okay, so it's the duty manager plus. It may well be at a time when there's only a few members of staff and not even the duty manager available at that time. So that's why I didn't want to specify particular roles. But if you look at the areas, area 1 is reception and the social area, the coffee area kind of thing around reception. Then checking that immediate ground floor area as well as the beauty salon. So that's first area. Second area is looking at plant room 1, should we say. That's the one where you can go through the male changing rooms and that side of the pool. So you've got, let's say, walking through the doorway into the toilets, into the male changing rooms, going through to the plant room, the showers as well, and then coming back from the plant room and walking into the side of the pool. Okay, so checking from that point of view. Area 3 is more or less exactly the same, but you're approaching it from a different direction. Female changing rooms, plant room 2, and pool. Okay, so thinking about the other side of the building, splitting it that way, just purely on how quickly different people can look at those areas. So areas 1, 2, and 3 are all about ground floor. Area 4 is upstairs because we're thinking about the gym and the studio mainly, and then the exit corridor to the external escape stairwell. Okay, so that's part of the plan, should we say, in terms of segregating it into 4 areas. What we want you to do is look into that, give instruction. That was the part I was wanting to say before. Assist with the evacuation of members, get them to stop what they're doing, leave the belongings, meet at the muster point outside. The other part is to do the sweep, the search and clear. Yeah, so you'll be doing both at the same time. If a person is still in the gym, if a person is still in the pool, if a person is still in the changing room, for example, what you're trying to make sure is that they evacuate and leave the building. That's a big part of this search and clear, because it's our responsibility, not the fire and rescue services. It's our responsibility to make sure that building is evacuated and left empty, so that when the fire brigade do turn up, they can fight the fire from outside of the building. That's the chief fire officer that comes and turns up. That's their number one priority, is to make sure that their staff remain safe. So we have to make sure that we get as many people out as possible before the fire and rescue service turn up. Okay, so the sweep or search and clear is literally look at your area, check that area, and then communicate it back to the lead person outside later. Yeah, so let's say there's somebody in the female changing rooms, they're freaking out, they're refusing to move anywhere, or they just can't. Okay, so what you do is you go and do everything else, and you come back to that female in the female changing rooms and say, are you still ready to go? If they're not ready to go, and you're saying the smoke's heading this way, end of, leave them behind, get outside, and maybe other members of staff can return back in and assist you in safely removing that person. So the communication and stopping and evaluating from a risk perspective, how do I handle this situation in a timely manner? It may well be the best thing to do is get out, communicate with the lead person, maybe get a couple of people to come back in to assist you in cajoling that person to evacuate the building. So what is search and clear? You've been given a designated area, and basically we're asking you to check that area. So I've put a couple of pictures of an office environment there, but you can see that they're going to walk down a corridor. They're going to go in all the rooms off the corridor. They'll go and talk to the people in each of those areas and say, please evacuate. And they'll check others, like one of the side rooms there is a kitchen area. So they walk into the kitchen area, visually check that there's nobody in that area. I'll come back to that point that I mentioned earlier, if safe to do so. If you, first thing, if you use the back of your hand rather than grabbing a handle, if you grip a handle and it's hot, it can cause a sear burn, and it can make your fist close rather than opening up. Okay, so approach it with the back of your hand, and also if you can, low, so if there is potential for a mini explosion, so the pressure's building up inside there, you open that door. As soon as you open the door, the oxygen's enriching that room, causes backdraft, is the common term. That can cause a mini explosion, and you could be engulfed in the flame as it comes out. Okay, so check with the back of your hand so you're not gripping onto it. Approach it low so you can, if it does go over your head, then there's less chance of you being hurt by it as well. Okay, so those are the approaches. If you have to open a door and you can't see through a vision panel as such, so you're taking a check. Is the handle hot? Can you feel some pressure against the door? If so, perhaps it's better not to open it up. But if you do, maybe you can use your foot or knee to open it up slightly and put your foot or knee behind it so that it doesn't push back against you and cause that mini explosion. Okay, so controlled approach if you feel at risk. Again, if the signs of smoke or fire, that's the end of, shut the door, turn around, walk away. Or if you feel the handle with the back of your hand and it's hot, end of, walk away. Okay, and communicate. So you're going around there, you're checking that everywhere's evacuated, empty, and then you're going to communicate afterwards. Once you've completed that, maybe you've got a report, a checklist that you want to do, or it's just verbally communicated to the lead person at the fire muster point. Try to be quick, try to be efficient, look for the search and clear tactics, don't take unnecessary risks, and shout. Yeah, you can be better at doing this and quicker if you shout as you get to a doorway so that people know who you are and what you're doing. As part of the evacuation procedure, step 4 says when each person is satisfied that their area is clear, then communicate that to the lead person. Tell them outside that my area is clear, and then as the other 3 people come together at the front or outside of the building, the fire muster point, they said, I've checked mine, I've checked mine, I've checked mine, the place is empty. Over. It may well be that you allocate someone else, another member of staff, to pick up a firebox, as we call it, or an emergency resource. It might have the foil blankets in. Think about people that have been in the swimming pool and they're just getting changed, or maybe they're just wearing the swimsuits and it's cold, perhaps. Put a foil blanket around them can make a difference. There might be somebody that tripped up or hurt themselves as they're evacuating and panicking on the way out. So a first aid box might be useful, and anything else that might be in the firebox that's needed for the purposes of the evacuation. So that's step 4. Step 5, the lead person needs to make a judgment. They might choose to check that everyone is accounted for. They might do their own check of the full building themselves, but the key point is to liaise with the fire and rescue service to tell them we've done a head count, everybody's counted for, the building's empty, and is there anything else you need to know? So things like, was gas isolated? What's happening in the plant room? Where should we focus our resources to keep the fire at a minimum to stop it from spreading? In the notes that we put on this fire plan, you can see the isolation of services, particularly gas and electricity. If there are any first aid requirements, as I was saying before, maybe there might be more than one person that's injured. Perhaps an appointed first aider will prioritise what needs to be done and then ask for assistance from another member of staff in that respect. If the evacuation is fire related and if it is small, and I do stress a small fire only. Now, what does that mean? I typically say, a kind of like a waste bin about that big with a little bit of combustible materials inside, and it's a small fire. That to me is small enough to be manageable as such. However, if you use the wrong method of extinguishing the fire, what you can do is end up pushing it out of the bin and spreading it around. So if you've been trained on fire extinguisher use, if you feel comfortable about using fire extinguishers, and if it's a small fire extinguisher, and if it is safe to do so, then have a go. Okay, and that's the main rules there. All of the fire safety controls remain throughout the evacuation, and that bit with the fire and rescue service. So once you're outside the building, you're handing over control to the fire and rescue safety officers, and the chief officer will then say, I will continue and make sure that nobody goes back in the building. And once they've put the fire out, or they've done an inspection, investigation, and analysis of what caused the fire evacuation to happen, then they will say, we've put it out, it's safe to return back into the building. Okay. Nobody is allowed back into a building until you've had that either from the chief fire officer or the lead person, i.e. the duty manager or a lead fire marshal, that's liaised with the fire officers and then said, yep, you can tell them to return back into the building. So just like I was saying before, in terms of use of a fire extinguisher, here's an example with a small fire. If you was to use that extinguisher, a CO2, the pressure that's inside that, if you pointed that too close, should we say, at the bin, it will blast it out and therefore will spread the fire. So make sure you've got the right technique. Stand further away, start hovering above it and beyond it, and then directing at it to prevent that from spreading. Yeah, so think about, has the alarm been raised? We can't rely on the fire alarm system, so we've got to fire and make sure everybody gets out. The emergency services have been called, 999. 2 people, please, because there is something called call challenge. So the fire and rescue service want 2 phone calls before they will turn out. Make sure they're using the right fire extinguisher. Well, I've done a fire risk assessment and identified that more or less you've got the right extinguishers in the right locations. Are you competent? Are you trained? a safe escape is available. Always have yourself behind the fire so you can make a safe escape. Yeah, so look for your doorways and check where you are. If you're trapped, then obviously you're going to need the fire extinguisher more so. So don't let yourself get into that position. A waste paper bin is a small fire, and therefore that's what I use as a visual judgment to attack if you feel confident, if safe to do so. Don't fight a fire if the room is filling with smoke or the fire is spreading. Don't fight the fire if other hazards are present, chemicals, gas cylinders, and things like that. And don't fight the fire if the fire is not reducing or more than one extinguisher is required. So what I'm saying there, one fire extinguisher only, end of. Okay, once you've done that, and you've only going to use that for the smaller ones, 30 seconds, slightly bigger ones, 9 kilograms, 45 seconds. Attack it for 45 seconds, then get out. You've done your bit. Okay, so hopefully I've given it justice. Like I said, this is a temporary measure, and we'll be back to normal in a week's time, hopefully, once the fire panel has been installed. So hopefully you're aware of the plan. You know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about fire risks and managing them more effectively. Extra patrols, please, and extra safety checks. Be more vigilant. Think about the variation on evacuation procedure as we've gone through, because now we're not relying on the sounder of the fire alarm going off in those areas, and only use a fire extinguisher on small fires, and if it is safe to do so. Thanks for your time. Stay safe, guys. Cheers.